The crystalline halls of Proxima Station glowed with soft blue light as representatives from 40 different species gathered for the monthly Galactic Council meeting. Ambassador Velkara of the Zenthari Empire stood at the central podium, her forearms gesturing as she addressed the assembly. She had requested this emergency session after her research team made a discovery on the dead world of Keslan 9, a planet that had once belonged to the predecessors, a civilization that had vanished 3 million years ago. The predecessors had left behind ruins scattered across the galaxy, most containing nothing but dust and broken machinery. But this time they had found something different. The translation matrix displayed the ancient text on holographic screens surrounding the chamber. The words were clear enough to make several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Beware the species that rises from Sol 3, the warning read. They do not stop. They do not yield. They will consume the stars themselves before admitting defeat." Velkara explained that her team had verified the translation multiple times, and that the carbon dating placed the message at roughly 2 million years old, which meant the predecessors had somehow known about humanity long before they even existed as a species. Councillor Thex of the Bavarian Collective laughed first, his translation device converting his chittering into standard galactic speech. He reminded everyone that the predecessors had left hundreds of cryptic warnings over the millennia, and most of them had proven false or wildly exaggerated. The council chamber filled with similar reactions as other representatives voiced their skepticism. Ambassador Velkara tried to maintain order, but the damage was done. Several members pulled up recent scans of the Sol system on their personal displays, showing a blue and green planet inhabited by primitive bipedal creatures who had only recently discovered how to split atoms and were still using chemical rockets to barely reach their own moon. The Kavran military attaché stood and declared that his preliminary assessment showed humans were at least 500 years away from developing faster than light travel, and even if they did manage it, they would face the same technological and resource barriers that every other species encountered. The galaxy was vast and unforgiving, he explained, and no species could expand indefinitely. There were natural limits to everything, from population growth to energy consumption to the simple logistics of maintaining colonies across interstellar distances. The representative from the merchant guilds added that humanity's economic indicators showed they were constantly fighting among themselves over resources and territory, which suggested they would likely destroy themselves before they ever became a galactic concern. The vote to file away the warning and move on to other matters passed with 37 in favor and only 3 against. Ambassador Velkara recorded her objection in the official records, but said nothing more as the council turned its attention to trade disputes and border negotiations. The ancient warning was transferred to the archives of historical curiosities, a vast digital repository where it would join thousands of other forgotten documents that no one would ever read again. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Jake Morrison sat in the cockpit of the experimental, faster-than-light test vehicle called Pioneer 1 in a hidden facility beneath the Nevada desert. He had trained for 3 years for this moment, studying the theoretical mathematics that Dr. Lisa Hamilton and her team had developed. The vehicle itself was barely large enough for one person, filled with experimental equipment that had never been tested at full power, and everyone knew there was a significant chance the engine would tear itself apart the moment it activated. Jake checked his instruments one final time and opened a communication channel to ground control, confirming he was ready to proceed with the test. The countdown began at 60 seconds and Jake felt his heart racing as he watched the numbers decrease on his display. At 30 seconds, he thought about his family back home in Ohio and wondered if they would understand why he had volunteered for such a dangerous mission. At 10 seconds, he gripped the control stick tighter and focused on the flight plan he had memorized. At 0, he engaged the faster-than-light drive and the universe turned inside out around him. The sensation lasted exactly 7.3 seconds according to the onboard computer, though to Jake it felt like both an instant and an eternity. The vehicle traveled 0.03 light-years, which was roughly 2 trillion kilometers before the engine began to overheat. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as temperatures spiked beyond safe limits and Jake fought to shut down the drive before it exploded. He was 3 seconds too slow and the engine detonated with enough force to tear through the rear shielding and fill the cockpit with superheated plasma. Jake woke up 6 days later in a military hospital with third-degree burns covering 40% of his body. Dr. Lisa Hamilton was standing next to his bed with tears in her eyes, apologizing repeatedly for the engine failure. Jake tried to smile through his pain and asked her a simple question. Did it work before it exploded, he wanted to know. Lisa nodded and explained that for 7 seconds, Pioneer 1 had achieved stable faster-than-light travel, which proved the mathematics were correct and the concept was viable. Jake closed his eyes and felt something like pride wash over him, despite the agony from his burns. When reporters asked if the faster-than-light program would continue after such a catastrophic failure, Jake gave them an answer from his hospital bed that would become famous across Earth. "We're just getting started," he said with that same pained smile. The video of his statement spread across global networks and inspired a generation of scientists and engineers who saw in his determination something fundamentally human. Dr. Lisa Hamilton returned to her laboratory the next day and began refining the engine design, working 18-hour shifts because she knew that Jake's sacrifice had given them the data they needed to succeed. Within 5 years, humanity had a working faster-than-light drive that did not explode. Within 10 years, they had established a colony on Mars with 15,000 permanent residents. Within 20 years, they had reached Europa and found evidence of microbial life beneath the frozen ocean. Within 50 years, the colony ship New Horizon arrived at Alpha Centauri carrying 30,000 settlers who would build humanity's first interstellar civilization on a planet they named Hope, the Galactic Council took notice of humanity's rapid progress but dismissed them as another emerging species that would eventually plateau once they encountered the same physical and economic limits that constrained everyone else. The Xanthari Empire sent an observation team to study human settlements, and their report concluded that humans were resourceful but reckless, innovative but short-sighted, and would likely burn themselves out within a few centuries. The report was filed away and forgotten, much like the ancient warning had been. But the elders remembered, and they watched from their hidden observatories scattered throughout the galaxy. The elders were ancient beings who had observed countless civilizations rise and fall over millions of years, and they recognized the pattern they were seeing in humanity's expansion. They sent messages to every major civilization in the galaxy, using communication channels that had not been opened in thousands of years. "The humans are not like you," their warning stated. "Stop them now, or face the consequences that will follow." No one listened because no one believed that a species barely a century into space travel could pose a threat to civilizations that had existed for millennia. The messages were dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of beings who had lived too long and seen too much. The galaxy continued on as it always had, secure in the knowledge that the natural order of things would constrain humanity just as it constrained everyone else. They were wrong, and they would learn this lesson in blood and fire. The Kavran Dominion had ruled 40 star systems for 3 centuries through military strength and technological superiority, and they had never encountered a species they considered worthy of respect. When their long-range scanners detected the human colony ship Liberty Bell entering the Taro system, which the Kavrans had claimed as their territory 70 years earlier, the Dominion High Command issued orders without hesitation. A battle fleet of 12 cruisers under the command of Admiral Krenth departed immediately to intercept and destroy the intruding vessel, carrying enough firepower to obliterate a small moon. Commander Ryan Foster had been reviewing supply manifests when the alert came through that Kavran ships were approaching at high speed. He commanded the Liberty Bell's defense force, which consisted of 3 frigates that were already 10 years old when Earth had commissioned them, and 2 fighter craft that had been designed for patrol duty rather than combat. The colony ship itself carried 3,000 people, including 1,500 children, and Ryan knew that his small force had no chance of defeating 12 Kavran cruisers in open battle. He called an emergency meeting with his officers and laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The Kavrans would arrive in 6 hours, and they would expect immediate surrender. But Ryan explained that surrendering to the Kavran Dominion meant slavery or death based on every report humanity had gathered about their culture. His weapons officer suggested they could try to run, but the Liberty Bell's engines were designed for long-distance travel rather than speed, and the Kavrans would catch them within an hour. His navigation officer proposed they could hide in the asteroid field at the edge of the system, but their life support would only last 3 weeks, and the caverns would eventually find them. Ryan listened to every suggestion and then told his officers something that would define the coming battle. "We're going to fight," he said, "and we're going to make them pay for every meter of space they take from us." His officers stared at him in silence, understanding that he was asking them to die. Ryan continued speaking, explaining that every minute they held the caverns in battle was another minute for the civilians to prepare the escape pods and emergency beacons. If even one person survived to tell Earth what happened here, then their sacrifice would mean something. His tactical officer asked what chance they had of actually damaging the cavern fleet, and Ryan smiled without humor. He said they had the element of surprise because no species had ever been crazy enough to fight against such overwhelming odds. When the Kavran fleet arrived in the Taros system, Admiral Krenth expected to receive a surrender signal within minutes. Instead, the 3 human frigates opened fire immediately, launching every missile they carried in a single massive barrage. The Cavrans had not raised their shields because they did not consider the human ships a threat, and that mistake cost them their forward cruiser. The vessel exploded in a brilliant flash as dozens of missiles overwhelmed its armor, and Admiral Krenth realized with shock that the humans were actually going to fight. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for decades. Ryan used tactics that violated every conventional rule of space warfare, treating his ships like disposable weapons rather than valuable assets. He ordered his frigates to charge directly at the Kavran formation, firing continuously even as enemy plasma beams tore through their hulls. When his ammunition ran low, he used the ships themselves as weapons, ramming them into Kavran vessels at speeds that shattered both craft. The 2 human fighters flew impossible attack patterns, dodging through debris fields and using wrecked ships as cover while targeting the Kavran cruiser's engine. Sections out Admiral Krenth found himself fighting a defensive battle against a force that should have been destroyed in minutes. Every time his ships moved to surround the humans, Ryan would sacrifice one of his vessels to break the formation. When the Caverns tried to ignore the frigates and target the colony ship directly, the human fighters would kamikaze into their weapon batteries. The Liberty Bell itself became part of the battle when Ryan gave the order that no one expected. He told the civilian crew to evacuate to the escape pods while he used the massive colony ship as a battering ram. The Liberty Bell accelerated on its remaining engines and crashed into the Kavran flagship with enough force to crack both vessels in half. Ryan broadcast his final message as the ships broke apart, telling his crew that he was proud to serve with them and asking them to remember that humanity never surrendered. The explosion consumed both ships and sent debris spinning through space, and Admiral Krenth watched in horror as his flagship died along with 300 of his finest warriors. The battle lasted 6 hours total, far longer than any engagement the Caverns had fought in living memory. When it finally ended, 8 Kavran cruisers were destroyed or disabled and the human force was completely eliminated. Only 200 humans survived in scattered escape pods that broadcast emergency signals into the void, and the Liberty Bell was nothing but fragments of metal drifting through space. Admiral Krenth ordered his remaining 4 ships to retreat immediately, ignoring standard procedure that required collecting escape pods and interrogating survivors. His report to the Dominion High Command was brief, but contained a warning that his superiors chose to ignore. "These humans fight like cornered animals," he wrote. "They show no regard for their own survival, and will sacrifice everything to inflict damage on their enemies. I recommend we avoid further conflict with this species until we understand them better." The Dominion leadership read his report and declared him a coward for allowing a primitive species to destroy 2/3 of his fleet. They ordered a full-scale invasion of human space, mobilizing 80 warships to teach humanity the price of defying the Kavran Dominion. Back on Earth, the news of the Liberty Bell's destruction sparked outrage and grief in equal measure. Engineer Melissa Grant received emergency authorization to design a new class of warship, and she assembled a team of 200 specialists who worked around the clock in shifts that lasted 18 hours or more. Melissa slept in her workshop and ate meals at her drafting table, rejecting every suggestion that would add even a single day to the production timeline. When government officials asked how she could possibly complete such a complex project in 8 months, she looked at them with exhausted eyes and said that people were dying while they debated schedules. The new warships were ready in 7 months and 20 days, equipped with weapons based on recovered Kavran technology and armor designed to withstand plasma beams. Admiral Greg Patterson took command of Earth's defense fleet, which now numbered 32 vessels thanks to Melissa's impossible work schedule. He studied every detail of Ryan Foster's last battle, understanding that the humans had lost, but they had proven something important. The caverns could be hurt and they could be frightened, and most importantly, they could be beaten if humanity was willing to pay the price. When the cavern armada of 80 ships arrived at the edge of human space, they expected to crush Earth's defenses within days. Instead, they encountered Admiral Greg Patterson's fleet, which refused to engage in the decisive battle the caverns wanted. Greg used hit-and-run tactics, striking at supply convoys and logistics bases while avoiding direct confrontation with the main fleet. Every time the caverns destroyed one of his ships, 2 more would appear from hidden bases scattered throughout human territory. Every time they thought they had cornered the Earth fleet, Greg would jump his ships away and attack somewhere else. The fighting retreat lasted 9 weeks and took the war deep into cavern territory, as Greg's fleet raided military installations and freed slave colonies. The cavern dominion lost 40 ships to mechanical failures, ambushes, and battles, where human forces accepted massive casualties to destroy high-value targets. The turning point came when Lieutenant Amy Chen piloted a single corvette equipped with an experimental jump drive directly into the shield envelope of the Emperor's flagship. She transmitted a final message saying she hoped her family would forgive her, and then she detonated the ship's reactor core inside the flagship's engineering section. The explosion killed Amy instantly and destroyed the pride of the cavern fleet, taking the Emperor's cousin and 500 crew members with it. The Dominion sued for peace within days, offering to cede 3 star systems to humanity and pledging non-aggression in exchange for an end to hostilities. Earth's government accepted the terms, and Admiral Greg Patterson returned home to a hero's welcome. The treaty was signed on neutral ground, and cavern military analysts added a classified note to their records that would be proven prophetic in the years to come. Never fight humans in a war they believe is existential, the note warned. They will die before they stop, and they will take you with them. 15 years after the Cavern War ended, humanity had expanded to 30 star systems and earned enough respect to receive an invitation to join the Galactic Council's outer committees. The galaxy had begun to accept that humans were here to stay, and trade agreements were signed with species who had initially viewed them as dangerous primitives. Human merchants traveled freely through established space lanes. Human scientists collaborated on research projects with alien colleagues, and human diplomats worked to build alliances that would protect their growing civilization. Everything seemed peaceful until the day the Hive arrived at the edge of known space. The first warning came from a Xanthari colony on the outer rim that sent a distress signal, lasting exactly 4 seconds before going silent. A rescue fleet arrived 3 days later to find the planet stripped of all biological matter, with buildings left standing but completely empty of any living thing. The investigation team found strange organic residue everywhere, and when they analyzed it under laboratory conditions, they discovered it contained genetic material from 17 different species, including the Xanthari colonists. The Galactic Council received the report with growing horror as they realized they were facing something that consumed entire populations. The Hive revealed itself 2 weeks later when a swarm of living ships attacked a Bavarian trade station. The ships were not made of metal or composite materials, but instead were grown from biological tissue, and they moved with coordinated precision that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Survivors reported that the Hive sent a simple message before the attack began. "You are food," the message stated. "You are resources. You will be consumed." The station was overrun in less than an hour as billions of insect-like creatures poured from the ships and devoured everything in their path. The Xanthari Empire mobilized the largest fleet in their history, sending 300 warships to stop the Hive's advance. The battle lasted 6 days and ended with the complete destruction of the Xanthari fleet. Military analysts studied the recordings and realized that the Hive learned from every encounter, adapting its tactics in real time and sharing information across the entire swarm instantly. Every drone that died taught the collective mind something new, and they never made the same mistake twice. The Cavern Dominion lasted slightly longer when they mounted their defense, using the aggressive tactics that had won them 40 systems. But 3 months later, their homeworld was consumed and their civilization was scattered. The Galactic Council evacuated to the core worlds as 17 species were, exterminated, and hundreds of colonies fell silent. Refugees flooded into the inner systems, bringing stories of planets stripped bare in days and populations consumed by creatures that turned living beings into more of themselves. The Council's military strategists calculated that at the current rate of expansion, the hive would reach the core worlds within 18 months. Humanity was advised to flee beyond the galactic edge since their 30. Systems lay directly in the path of the advancing. Swarm President Karen Sullivan addressed the combined governments of human space from her office on Earth, and her speech was broadcast to every colony and station humanity controlled. She acknowledged that the logical choice was to run and save themselves, while other species bought them time with their own destruction. But logic had never been humanity's strongest trait, she explained, and running away while others died was not something humans could live with. The galaxy sheltered us when we were young, she said. Now it's our turn to stand and fight. Dr. Nathan Wells proposed a solution that horrified the scientific community and violated every galactic convention on warfare that had been established over millennia. He wanted to create a biological weapon specifically designed to attack the hive's genetic structure, severing the mental connections that allowed trillions of drones to function as a single organism. His proposal included detailed research showing that the weapon would turn the hive into mindless creatures, unable to coordinate or even feed themselves. The ethical objections were immediate and numerous because such a weapon could potentially mutate and threaten other species, making it banned by every civilized government in the galaxy. Nathan listened to the objections and then asked a simple question. How many more species needed to die before ethics became less important than survival? The room fell silent because no one had an answer that satisfied both their moral principles and the reality of extinction. Earth's government gave Nathan authorization to proceed, and he assembled a research team that included former Kavran military scientists and Zenthari geneticists who had lost their homeworlds to the hive. They worked in a hidden laboratory for 8 months, creating and testing variants of the retrovirus until they found one that would attack only the hive's specific genetic markers. The weapon was ready, but delivery was the problem that seemed insurmountable. Someone would have to penetrate deep into hive territory, bypass millions of drones and hundreds of capital vessels, and deliver the retrovirus directly into a core ship where the Central Intelligence resided. Every military analyst agreed it was a suicide mission with almost no chance of success. Colonel Steve Henderson volunteered immediately, and within a week he had assembled a team of 40 volunteers who all understood they would not be coming home. They called themselves the Last Light, and they spent 2 weeks preparing for the mission. Steve made sure every team member recorded final messages for their families, and he personally reviewed the tactical plan dozens of times looking for any way to improve their chances. The plan relied on using a captured hive vessel to approach the core ship without triggering defensive responses, and then fighting through whatever security forces protected the Central Intelligence. Steve knew that even if everything went perfectly, they would still lose at least half the team before reaching their objective. The mission launched from a hidden human base at the edge of hive territory. The captured vessel responded correctly to hive signals and was allowed to approach the core ship without incident. Steve's team prepared their weapons and equipment as the 2 ships docked, and then they flooded through the connection tube into a nightmare of organic corridors and alien architecture. The hive recognized the intrusion within seconds and responded with overwhelming force as thousands of drones converged. On the human position, the fighting was brutal in close quarters as the Last Light advanced, meter by meter through the core ship. Steve lost 8 team members in the first corridor, crushed by creatures that resembled armored beetles the size of ground vehicles. His demolitions expert sacrificed herself to collapse a section of corridor, buying them 30 seconds to reach the next junction. His communications officer stayed behind to hold a choke point, broadcasting tactical data until the drones overwhelmed his position. Every member of the team knew their role and accepted their fate without hesitation. They reached the central chamber after 90 minutes of continuous fighting, having lost 32 of their 40 members. Steve stood before a massive organic structure that pulsed with bioluminescent light, and he could feel the intelligence behind it studying him with curiosity. He activated the retrovirus deployment system and sent his final message back to Earth through the dying communication relay. For Earth, he said. For the galaxy. For everyone who said it couldn't be done. The retrovirus released into the chamber's atmosphere and began spreading, through the organic systems that connected every part of the hive. Colonel Steve Henderson died 4 minutes later, when the remaining drones tore through the last defensive position, but by then the retrovirus had already begun its work. The virus spread through the hive's biological network at exponential rates, severing the neural connections that linked trillions of organisms into a single consciousness. Within hours, hive ships began drifting aimlessly as their crews lost all coordination. Within days, the entire swarm had collapsed as drones reverted to base instincts and died in massive numbers. Without the collective intelligence to guide them, the galaxy mourned the 40 humans who gave their lives to stop the hive, and memorials were constructed on a dozen worlds to honor their sacrifice. The Galactic Council awarded humanity full membership with voting rights and territorial control over any systems they had defended during the war. Human representatives took their seats in the central chamber where only the most powerful civilizations had sat for thousands of years. Earth received delegations from species who had previously ignored or dismissed them, offering alliances and treaties that recognized humanity as a major galactic power. The elders watched these developments from their ancient observatories and issued another warning to any who would listen. They will not stop, the message stated. Even death does not deter them. They have shown the galaxy what they are willing to sacrifice, and now the question becomes what they will demand in return. The warning was noted in official records but largely ignored because humanity had just saved the galaxy from extinction. No one wanted to consider that the species who had sacrificed so much might eventually want something back. With the hive defeated and their status as full members of the Galactic Council secured, humanity entered an era of expansion that made other species increasingly nervous. Within a century, humans had settled 200 star systems, establishing colonies on worlds that other species had deemed too difficult or too expensive to terraform. Within 2 centuries, that number had grown to 500 systems, and human ships were exploring regions of space that had been left untouched for millennia. The galaxy watched this rapid growth with emotions ranging from admiration to outright fear. Human merchants dominated trade routes through sheer persistence and willingness to take risks that made other species uncomfortable. Trader Linda Brooks became famous throughout the galaxy when she established the first commercial route through the Calixa Nebula, a region that every other species avoided due to intense radiation and navigation hazards that made conventional travel impossible. Linda made the journey 40 times over 3 years, mapping safe corridors through the radiation storms and establishing relay stations that allowed other ships to follow. Her own vessel's radiation shielding finally failed on her 41st journey, and she barely survived long enough to reach a medical station. But by then 20 human ships were using her route and generating enormous profits. The merchant guilds complained to the Galactic Council that human traders were undercutting established prices and destabilizing markets that had been carefully balanced for centuries. Linda's route through the Calixa Nebula cut travel time between 2 major trade hubs from 6 weeks to 10 days, which meant human merchants could deliver goods faster and cheaper than their competitors. Traditional shipping companies found themselves losing contracts to human firms who offered better service at lower prices, and several ancient trading houses went bankrupt within a decade. The council received petitions demanding that humans be restricted to certain trade routes, but the legal framework had no precedent for limiting a species based solely on their competitive success. Human scientists pushed boundaries that other species had learned to respect through bitter experience. Dr. Paul Singh developed a revolutionary terraforming technique that accelerated the process from 500 years to 80 by using modified bacteria to convert atmospheric composition at rates previously thought impossible. When the Galactic Science Council questioned whether his technique was safe for long-term ecological stability, Paul responded by terraforming 3 worlds simultaneously as a demonstration. All 3 projects succeeded ahead of schedule, and within 20 years those worlds housed thriving human colonies with populations in the millions. The Science Council issued warnings about unknown long-term effects and the danger of rushing processes that nature intended to take millennia. But human colonists were already applying Paul's techniques to dozens of candidate worlds. Species who had waited centuries for their terraforming projects to complete watched in frustration as humans transformed hostile planets into garden worlds in less than a human lifetime. Some alien scientists began studying human methods and requesting collaboration, while others filed formal complaints about reckless experimentation that could have unforeseen consequences. Human explorers ventured into regions that other species avoided due to superstition or legitimate danger. Captain Nicole Davis led the first expedition into the Dark Zone, a vast region of space where dozens of ships had vanished over the centuries and which most species believed was cursed by ancient disasters. Nicole's expedition spent 18 months mapping the region, and she returned with detailed charts of 17 habitable systems and scientific data proving that the so-called curse was actually a cluster of unusual stellar phenomena that interfered with standard navigation systems. Her findings opened an entire sector for colonization, and within 5 years human settlements dotted worlds that other species had feared for generations. The galaxy began to understand what the elders had tried to warn them about decades earlier. Humans did not acknowledge limitations the way other species did. Where most civilizations saw a dangerous nebula and chose safer routes, humans saw a challenge to overcome and potential profit. Where other species saw terraforming as a centuries-long investment requiring patience, humans saw an obstacle that could be eliminated with enough innovation. Where ancient mysteries and warnings kept others away, humans saw opportunities for discovery and expansion. Every boundary that the galaxy had accepted as natural and unchangeable, humans treated as temporary and negotiable. Senator Victor Hayes of the Zenthari Empire stood before the Galactic Council and proposed formal restrictions on human expansion. His speech was carefully crafted to avoid appearing overtly hostile while making his concerns clear. He argued that humanity was growing too fast and destabilizing systems that had maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. Human merchants were destroying traditional trade networks, he explained. Human scientists were rushing ahead with dangerous technologies without proper testing. Human explorers were pushing into territories that had been left alone for good reasons. Senator Hayes proposed a framework of regulations that would limit how many systems humanity could colonize per decade and require approval from the Council before any major terraforming projects could begin. The proposal sparked heated debate that lasted for weeks. Species who had been economically damaged by human competition supported the restrictions enthusiastically. The merchant guilds lobbied heavily for regulations that would protect their traditional markets. Military alliances that had formed specifically to contain human expansion added their voices to the call for limitations. But other species remembered that humans had saved the galaxy from the hive, and they argued that restricting humanity after such sacrifice would be both ungrateful and unjust. The vote failed by a narrow margin, but the debate revealed deep divisions in how different species viewed humanity's role in the galaxy. Dr. Elizabeth Moore served as humanity's lead representative to the Galactic Council, and she addressed the growing concerns in a speech that would be remembered for generations. She acknowledged that human expansion made other species uncomfortable, and that human methods often seemed reckless by conventional standards. But she asked the Council to understand that limitation was simply not part of human nature. Humans looked at the stars and could not help but wonder what was out there, she explained. They saw challenges and felt compelled to overcome them. They encountered problems and immediately began searching for solutions. "You call it dangerous," Elizabeth said. "We call it being alive." Her speech was met with silence as council members absorbed her words. Some saw wisdom in her explanation and felt a grudging respect for humanity's drive. Others heard confirmation of their worst fears about a species that refused to accept the natural order. The Zenthari delegation walked out of the chamber in protest, and several other species followed. The division between pro-human and anti-human factions became more pronounced with each passing year as humanity continued expanding despite the controversy. The elders observed these developments from their hidden stations throughout the galaxy and discussed what they were witnessing. They had seen this pattern before millions of years ago with the predecessors themselves. That ancient civilization had expanded too far and too fast, spreading across the galaxy in a wave of colonization that seemed unstoppable. But the predecessors had eventually collapsed under their own momentum, unable to maintain cohesion across such vast distances, and their civilization had fragmented into warring factions before vanishing entirely. The elders wondered if humanity would face the same fate, or if they would somehow be different. One elder suggested they intervene directly and force humanity to slow down before they destroyed themselves. Another argued that interference would only make humans more determined to prove they could succeed. A third pointed out that every species had the right to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons. even if those lessons came at a terrible cost. The debate among the elders continued without resolution, as they watched humanity spread across the galaxy like a wave that showed no signs of breaking. Human colonies pushed deeper into unexplored space, establishing outposts in regions that had never seen intelligent life. Human corporations negotiated mining rights on asteroids that other species considered too remote to be profitable. Human research stations operated in dangerous environments that most species avoided entirely. Everywhere humans went, they left their mark on the galaxy, and that mark grew larger with each passing year. Some species celebrated human achievements and sought to learn from their methods. Others feared what would happen when humanity finally encountered a problem they could not solve through determination and sacrifice alone. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was the force driving that change. Whether the transformation would ultimately benefit everyone or lead to catastrophe remained unclear. But one thing was certain. The ancient warning had been absolutely correct about one fundamental truth. Humanity could not be stopped, and they showed no signs of even slowing down. The crisis that would determine humanity's future did not come from an alien threat but from within their own civilization. 3 frontier colonies on the edge of human space declared independence from Earth, calling themselves the Free Systems Alliance, and claiming that the central government had grown weak and too willing to compromise with species who feared human success. Governor Marcus Kane led the rebellion from his headquarters on the colony world of New Dakota, broadcasting messages that appealed to humanity's pride and their history of overcoming impossible odds. He reminded colonists that humans had not reached the stars by asking permission or accepting limitations, and he declared that it was time to stop apologizing for being stronger and more determined than every other species in the galaxy. Marcus was a charismatic leader who had built his political career on frontier worlds where people valued independence and self-reliance above diplomatic niceties. He had fought in the Hive War as a junior officer and carried shrapnel scars that he displayed proudly as proof of his dedication to humanity's survival. His speeches resonated with colonists who felt that Earth's government was holding them back, and support for the free systems grew rapidly across the frontier. Within 6 months, Marcus commanded a fleet of 40 warships and controlled mining operations that supplied a significant portion of humanity's raw materials. The breaking point came when Free Systems forces attacked a Xanthari mining colony in a disputed border region, killing 300 alien workers and claiming the territory for humanity. Marcus broadcast justification for the attack, arguing that the Xanthari had no right to resources in space that humans could use more efficiently. Earth's government immediately disavowed the action and offered reparations to the Xanthari Empire, but the damage was done. The attack gave the anti-human coalition exactly the justification they needed to take: military action against all of humanity. 7 major species formed an alliance and issued an ultimatum to Earth. Humanity must accept permanent borders, submit to galactic oversight of all colonial expansion, and surrender Governor Marcus Kane for trial on charges of war crimes. If Earth refused or failed to comply within 30 days, the coalition would use military force to contain humanity by any means necessary. Their combined fleet of 3,000 warships assembled at the border of human space in a display of force designed to intimidate Earth into submission. It was the largest military gathering in recorded galactic history, and it represented civilizations with thousands of years of experience in warfare. President Andrew Miller faced the most difficult decision any human leader had confronted since first contact. Earth's defense fleet numbered 800 ships, most of which were newer and more advanced than their Cavern War predecessors. But 800 against 3,000 meant certain defeat in any direct engagement. His military advisors ran simulations that showed Earth could potentially destroy half the coalition fleet before losing. But that would still leave 1,500 enemy ships to devastate human colonies. His intelligence services reported that several coalition members were already discussing occupation plans for Earth itself. Admiral Claire Johnson commanded Earth's defense fleet, and she argued passionately for war during the emergency cabinet meetings. She reminded everyone that humanity had never backed down from a fight, even when the odds seemed impossible. If we start accepting limitations now, she said, we will spend the rest of our existence backing down whenever someone threatens us. Admiral Claire believed that fighting and losing was preferable to surrendering, because at least the galaxy would remember that humans chose death over submission. Her position had significant support among the military and the frontier colonies that had not joined Marcus Kane's rebellion. Dr. Sam Peterson served as humanity's chief diplomat, and he presented the opposite argument with equal conviction. He acknowledged that humanity had achieved remarkable things through determination and refusal to quit, but he questioned whether those traits applied to every situation. Sometimes knowing when to compromise showed more strength than mindless aggression, he argued. Humanity had pushed hard and fast for 2 centuries, and maybe it was time to pause and consolidate what they had, rather than risking everything in a war they could not win. His position appealed to those who feared that human pride would lead to human extinction. The debate raged in government chambers and across communication networks for 3 weeks while the coalition fleet waited at the border. Public opinion was divided almost evenly between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to negotiate. Then something unexpected happened that changed the entire conversation. A young soldier named Private Danny Walsh, stationed on a border colony, recorded a video on his personal communicator and uploaded it to the human network. The video showed Danny and his unit working alongside Xanthari refugees who had fled from Free Systems aggression, building a school for children from both species. Danny spoke directly to the camera with dirt on his face and exhaustion in his voice. "Everyone is talking about war," he said, "but look at what we are doing here. Humans and Xanthari working together, building something instead of destroying it. Maybe this is who we really are, not the people attacking colonies or threatening to fight impossible battles. Maybe our strength is not just that we refuse to stop, but that we can choose what direction we move in." The video spread across human space within hours, and millions of similar recordings emerged from colonies throughout human territory. Humans and aliens living together, working together, creating communities that transcended species barriers. President Andrew Miller watched these videos in his office late at night, and he realized something that had been obvious but overlooked. Humanity's defining trait was not aggression or stubbornness, but adaptability. Humans had survived and thrived by being willing to change, to learn, to become something new when circumstances demanded it. He drafted a proposal that night and presented it to both the Coalition and the Free Systems the following morning. The proposal acknowledged that humanity had expanded too aggressively and that legitimate concerns existed about their growth. President Miller offered to accept limitations on territorial expansion for the next century, giving the galaxy time to adjust to human presence. In exchange, he asked the Coalition to help Earth bring the Free Systems back peacefully, rather than through military force. More importantly, he proposed a joint initiative where human innovation and determination would be paired with other species' experience and wisdom, creating collaborative projects that benefited everyone. The Coalition hesitated because the proposal required them to trust a species they had just threatened with military destruction. The Free Systems rejected it immediately, with Marcus Kane declaring that accepting any limitations was betrayal of everything humanity had fought for. The debate seemed deadlocked until the elders, who had remained silent observers for millions of years, sent their first direct message to the Galactic Council in recorded history. The message was brief but carried weight that no other voice in the galaxy possessed. The predecessor's warning was incomplete, the elders explained. Humanity cannot be stopped, this is true, but they can be directed and inspired and partnered with. The question was never whether to stop them, because that was always impossible. The question is whether to oppose them or join them. The species that learns to work with humans will thrive, while those who try to contain them will only create the very conflict they fear. The vote passed by a narrow margin, and the Coalition agreed to President Miller's proposal. The Free Systems found themselves surrounded by overwhelming force from both Earth and the Coalition, with no possibility of victory or escape. Marcus Kane was offered a choice between surrender and destruction, and after consulting with his advisors, he chose surrender. He was transported to Earth to face trial for war crimes, and the Free Systems colonies were reintegrated into human space under a new charter that included galactic oversight. Admiral Claire Johnson visited Marcus in his detention cell before the trial began. She told him that he had wanted to show the galaxy human strength, but he had forgotten the most important lesson from their history. "Our real strength is not that we cannot be stopped," she said. "It is that we choose what we pursue. We chose to pursue peace instead of war, and that takes more courage than fighting ever could. Marcus had no response because he understood that she was right. 5 years after the crisis ended, Captain Danny Walsh commanded the first vessel of the Joint Exploration Initiative, a ship crewed by humans, Xanthari Caverns, and representatives from a dozen other species. Their mission was to explore uncharted regions beyond the galactic rim, seeking new worlds and new knowledge through cooperation rather than competition. Danny stood on the bridge during their launch ceremony and thought about how close they had come to destroying everything through pride and fear. On Earth, a monument was erected in the capital city with the names of every human who had died in the journey to the stars. The list included Jake Morrison, who had survived the first faster-than-light test, Ryan Foster, who had defended the Liberty Bell against impossible odds,